Snow was falling steadily outside Murphy's Diner on Christmas Eve 2025, creating a winter wonderland that contrasted sharply with the warm, bustling atmosphere inside. The vintage neon sign flickered cheerfully in the window, casting red and green shadows on the snow-covered sidewalk of downtown Portland, Oregon. 16-year-old Jake Martinez wiped down tables with practiced efficiency, his mind divided between his work and his concern for his father, Carlos, who sat at the far end of the counter nursing his third cup of coffee. Carlos had been laid off from his construction job 2 weeks ago, and despite his brave face, Jake could see the worry lines deepening around his father's eyes. "Jake, honey," called out Marge Kelly, the diner's head waitress and unofficial mother. "Figure to the staff, can you grab the new guy and show him how we do things around here? He starts tonight." Jake looked toward the kitchen door where a man in his 50s emerged, wearing an ill-fitting server's apron and looking slightly out of place. The man was well-groomed despite his nervous demeanor, with silver-touched hair and hands that looked more accustomed to holding a pen than carrying plates. "You must be the new waiter," Jake said, extending his hand. "I'm Jake. Marge said I should show you the ropes." "Thank you," the man replied with a warm smile. "I'm David Smith. I appreciate the help. It's been a while since I've done this kind of work." Something about the man's accent and mannerisms suggested he wasn't used to service work. But Jake had learned not to judge people's circumstances. In 2025's tough economy, everyone was doing whatever they could to make ends meet. "Don't worry, David. Everyone here is family. Marge has been running this place for 20 years, and she'll take care of you." Jake gestured around the diner. "We get a mix of regulars and tourists. Christmas Eve is usually busy with people who don't have anywhere else to go," as if on cue. The bell above the door chimed, and an elderly woman entered, shaking snow from her coat. Jake recognized her immediately, Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, a widow who lived alone in the apartment building across the street. "Mrs. Thompson," Jake called out warmly. "Your usual table." "Oh, Jake, you're such a sweetheart." "Yes, please. And I see you have a new colleague." She smiled at David, who was observing the interaction with intense interest. David watched as Jake seated Mrs. Thompson with genuine care, making sure she had extra napkins and a fresh cup of the coffee she preferred. When Jake returned, David looked impressed. "You really know your customers," David observed. "Mrs. Thompson comes in every Christmas Eve. Her husband used to bring her here for their anniversary, and after he passed, she kept up the tradition. Marge never charges her full price, but Mrs. Thompson doesn't know that." David raised an eyebrow. "The owner doesn't mind taking a loss." Jake shrugged. "Marge says the owner understands that some things are more important than profit." "Speaking of which, have you ever met him, Mr. Patterson?" "I might have," David said carefully. "What do you know about him?" "Not much. He inherited this place from his uncle about 5 years ago. Marge says he's some kind of business guy who lives in the hills, but he never comes around. Some people think he doesn't care about this place, but I don't know. He's kept everyone employed, even during the pandemic." The evening rush began in earnest as more customers filled the diner. David proved to be a surprisingly capable waiter. Despite his earlier nervousness, though Jake noticed, he seemed more interested in watching the interactions between staff and customers than focusing solely on his own tables. Around 8 o'clock, Jake's father Carlos approached the counter where Jake was preparing drinks. "Mio," Carlos said quietly, "I'm going to head home. Don't stay too late, okay?" "Dad, wait." Jake glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "I know money's tight right now, but maybe I could ask Marge for more hours. Or maybe the owner." "No, Jake," Carlos interrupted firmly. "I don't want you begging for charity. We'll figure something out." David, who had been wiping down nearby tables, couldn't help but overhear. After Carlos left, he approached Jake. "Your father seems like a good man," David said. "The best," Jake replied, his voice thick with emotion. "He's worked construction for 15 years, never missed a day unless I was sick, but the company downsized. And at 45, he's having trouble finding new work. He won't let me quit school to work full-time, even though we need the money." David was quiet for a moment, then asked, What would help your family most right now? Jake looked surprised by the directness of the question. Honestly, Dad, finding a steady job. He's skilled, reliable, and he just needs someone to give him a chance. But in this economy, Jake trailed off, not wanting to sound like he was complaining. The rest of the evening passed quickly, with David proving himself to be not just competent, but genuinely caring toward the customers. Jake noticed that David seemed particularly attentive to the older patrons and families who appeared to be struggling financially. As they cleaned up at the end of the night, Marge pulled Jake aside. "That new guy, David, he's something special. Customers love him, and he's got good instincts. Plus, he left a $50 tip for Maria in the kitchen, because he said her food reminded him of his grandmother's cooking." A $50 tip. Jake was stunned. On his first night? Where does a new waiter get that kind of money? Marge shrugged. Maybe he's saving up for Christmas presents. Or maybe he's one of those people who's been down and remembers what kindness means. As Jake walked to his car through the falling snow, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to David Smith than met the eye. The man's expensive watch, his perfectly maintained teeth, and his way of speaking all suggested a background very different from the typical diner worker. But in a world where everyone had their struggles, Jake had learned that people's stories were often more complicated than they appeared. Whatever David's background, he seemed genuinely kind. And in Jake's experience, that was what mattered most. Little did Jake know that his observation about David was more accurate than he could have imagined, and that Christmas Eve at Murphy's Diner was about to become a night that would change his family's life forever. Christmas Eve service continued at Murphy's Diner, and David Smith, whose real name was David Patterson, found himself genuinely enjoying the work in a way that surprised him. As the multi-millionaire owner of Patterson Hospitality Group, which included 15 restaurants across the Pacific Northwest, he had spent years reviewing profit reports and attending board meetings. But working directly with customers and staff gave him a perspective he'd never had before. "David, can you take table 7? Marge called out. "It's the Rodriguez family. They come in every few months. Sweet people, but they always look at the prices real careful like." David approached the table where a young couple sat with 2 small children, a boy about 8 and a girl who couldn't be more than 5. The family was dressed in their best clothes, but David's experienced eye could tell that best meant carefully maintained hand-me-downs and discount store finds. "Good evening," David said warmly. "I'm David, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with some drinks?" The father, Miguel Rodriguez, scanned the menu. "Could we get to coffees and to apple juices for the kids?" "Of course. And have you had a chance to look at our Christmas Eve specials?" David watched as Miguel and his wife Sophia exchanged glances. The specials were prominently displayed, but they were also the most expensive items on the menu. "We'll just need a few more minutes," Sophia said with a gentle smile. David nodded and returned to the server station, where Jake was preparing drinks for another table. "That family," David asked quietly, "the Rodriguez family, are they regulars?" Jake looked over and nodded. "They come in maybe every 2 months. Usually after Miguel gets paid from his landscaping business. They save up to take the kids out for a nice dinner. It's really sweet. You can tell it's a big deal for them." David watched as the Rodriguez family continued to study the menu. He could see Miguel quietly adding up prices in his head, while the children excitedly pointed at pictures of burgers and milkshakes. "What would they normally order?" David asked. "Usually they split to adult entrees among the 4 of them, and they always leave room for 1 piece of pie to share for dessert. The kids think it's the best meal in the world." Something stirred in David's chest as he watched the family. His own children, now adults with families of their own, lived across the country and rarely visited. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen such pure joy in something as simple as a shared dinner. When David returned to take their order, Miguel had clearly made his calculations. "We'll have the meatloaf dinner and the chicken special, both with extra vegetables instead of appetizers. And could we get extra plates for sharing?" "Absolutely," David said. Then, making a decision that felt completely natural, he added, "I should mention that we're running a special Christmas Eve promotion tonight. Families with children get our holiday meal package that includes appetizers, entrees, for everyone, and dessert for the same price as to regular dinners. Miguel and Sophia looked confused. We didn't see that advertised anywhere. It's a soft launch. David improvised. We're testing it out tonight to see how families respond. The children's eyes lit up at the possibility of their own meals, and David could see the parents' relief at being able to give their kids a special Christmas Eve without breaking their budget. Meanwhile, across the diner, Jake was serving an elderly man named Frank who came in every Christmas Eve. Since his wife died 3 years ago, Frank always ordered the same thing, coffee and apple pie, and always sat at the table where he and his wife used to celebrate their anniversary. David watched Jake's interaction with Frank with growing admiration. The teenager didn't just serve the man, he sat with him for a few minutes, asking about his week and listening to stories about Frank's late wife, Margaret. "Your son is remarkable," David said to Carlos, who had returned to pick up Jake after finishing a job interview. Carlos looked surprised. "My son. You know Jake. I'm David Smith, the new waiter. Jake trained me tonight. You should be proud. He treats every customer like family." Carlos's chest swelled with pride. "He's a good boy. Always has been. I just wish I could provide better for him, you know. He's smart enough for college. But with me being out of work." "What kind of work do you do?" David asked. "Construction. 20 years experience in everything from foundations to finish work, but companies want younger guys now, or they want people with college degrees for management positions." David nodded thoughtfully. "Have you considered commercial restaurant construction? There's a lot of growth in that sector, and experience matters more than age." Carlos looked interested. "I hadn't thought about specializing like that." "Do you know much about the restaurant business?" "A little," David said with understatement. "I might know some people who are looking for experienced construction workers. Let me ask around." As the evening progressed, David found himself seeing his diner and his customers through completely new eyes. There was Mrs. Thompson, who came in every Christmas Eve to feel less alone. The Rodriguez family, saving up for months to give their children a special memory. Frank, keeping his wife's memory alive through their tradition. Jake, working to help support his family while maintaining his kindness and integrity. And there was his staff, Marge, who had been essentially managing the place for him while he collected profits from a distance. Maria in the kitchen, who worked double shifts to support her elderly mother, and Jake, who somehow balanced school, work, and caring about every person who walked through the door. Around 10 o'clock, as the diner began to quiet down, David made a decision that surprised even him. He approached Marge at the register. "Marge, that Christmas Eve family promotion I mentioned, let's make it official. Every Christmas Eve from now on, families with children eat for half price." Marge looked puzzled. "David, honey, you're new here. You can't just decide restaurant policies. What if I told you I had authorization from the owner?" "How would you know what the owner wants?" "Nobody's seen Mr. Patterson in years." David smiled. Maybe it's time that changed. As he cleaned tables and prepared for closing, David realized that this night had shown him something he'd been missing from his successful but isolated life. He'd built a business empire, but forgotten what business was really about: serving people, creating community, and using success to make other people's lives better. Tomorrow, Christmas Day, would bring some major changes to Murphy's Diner, but tonight, David was content to finish his shift as a waiter, having learned more about his own business and himself than any board meeting had ever taught him. Christmas morning arrived crisp and bright in Portland, and Jake arrived at Murphy's Diner early to help with the holiday preparation. The diner always opened late on Christmas Day, serving a traditional meal for people who had nowhere else to go. It was one of Jake's favorite days of the year, seeing how the diner became a temporary family for lonely souls throughout the city. To his surprise, David was already there, helping Marge set up the dining room with extra decorations and preparing tables for the expected crowd. "David, you didn't have to come in on Christmas," Jake said. "Marge usually gives new employees Christmas off." "I wanted to be here," David replied genuinely. "Last night made me realize how much this place means to people. Besides, where else would I rather be?" As they worked together, Jake found himself increasingly curious about David. The man's expensive leather shoes, his way of organizing the salt and pepper shakers with mathematical precision, and his detailed questions about the restaurant's operations all seemed odd for a newly hired waiter. "David, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. What did you do before this? I mean, you seem like you know a lot about business. And last night you were asking questions that sounded like..." "Like what?" "Like an owner would ask, not a waiter." David paused in his work, considering how to respond. At that moment, Marge's voice called out from the kitchen, "Boys, we've got company. Someone's here early." Jake looked through the window to see a sleek black Mercedes pulling into the parking lot. "That's weird. We don't open for another hour." A well-dressed woman in her 40s emerged from the car, followed by a man in an expensive overcoat. They approached the door with the confidence of people who expected to be accommodated. Marge unlocked the door reluctantly. "I'm sorry, but we're not open yet. We start serving at noon. We're looking for David Patterson," the woman said briskly. "We understand he might be here." Jake felt his stomach drop. David Patterson, the owner. He looked at David, who had gone pale but was standing straighter, his entire demeanor shifting. "I'm David Patterson," David said, his voice carrying an authority that Jake had never heard before. The woman looked relieved. "Mr. Patterson, thank goodness. When your assistant said you were working Christmas Eve at one of your restaurants, we thought there was some kind of emergency. I'm Jennifer Walsh from Walsh and Associates, and this is Richard Chen from Pacific Bank. We need to discuss the Henderson property acquisition before the deadline expires tomorrow." Jake stared at David. "Mr. Patterson," in shock. "You're the owner?" David looked at Jake with an expression that mixed guilt and something that might have been fear. "Jake, I can explain. You've been lying to us this whole time." "Not lying exactly. I wanted to understand how my business really operates, how my employees and customers experience this place." Marge, who had been listening with growing amazement, stepped forward. "David Patterson, the Mr. Patterson who owns this place. You've been serving tables and washing dishes, yes, and learning more about my own restaurant than I have in 5 years of reading reports." Jennifer Walsh looked impatient. "Mr. Patterson, we really need to discuss these contracts. The Henderson deal is worth $12 million, and we need your signature before." "The Henderson deal can wait," David said firmly. "This is Christmas, and there are more important things happening here today." Richard Chen stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, $12 million in real estate development shouldn't wait for." He gestured around the diner dismissively. "Whatever this is." Jake felt anger flare in his chest. "Whatever this is people's lives, man. This is Mrs. Thompson having somewhere to go so she's not alone on Christmas. This is families like the Rodriguez family being able to give their kids a special meal. This is Frank keeping his wife's memory alive." David looked at Jake with profound respect. "Exactly. Jennifer, Richard, I need you to understand something. This diner earns more than profit. It earns loyalty, community, and meaning. That's worth more than any real estate deal." "But sir," Jennifer protested, "your expansion plans for the Patterson Hospitality Group depend on..." "My expansion plans are about to change significantly." David turned to address Jake and Marge directly. "I owe you both an apology and an explanation. Yes, I'm David Patterson, and I own this diner along with 14 other restaurants. But last night, working alongside Jake and serving our customers, I realized I'd lost sight of what hospitality really means." He gestured around the diner. "I've been treating these places like numbers on a spreadsheet instead of pillars of their communities. Jake, watching you care for every customer, seeing how you balance work and school and worry about your father, you reminded me what real success looks like." Jake was still processing the revelation. "So when you asked about my dad's work situation, I was genuinely concerned, and I meant what I said about knowing people in restaurant construction. In fact, I'm about to announce a major renovation project for all my properties, and I'll need a construction supervisor who understands quality and integrity." Carlos, who had arrived to pick up Jake and overheard the conversation, stepped forward. "Mr. Patterson, if you're offering my son's father a job out of pity, I'm offering him a job because Jake's character tells me everything I need to know about how you raised him, And because last night convinced me that I need people around me who understand what really matters, David turned back to his business associates. Jennifer, cancel the Henderson meeting. Richard, I want you to set up a fund call at the Murphy's Diner Community Fund. I want to endow scholarships for employees' children who want to attend college. How much should we allocate? Richard asked, still looking bewildered. David looked at Jake, then at Marge, then around the diner that was about to fill with people who needed a place to belong on Christmas Day. Let's start with the $12 million from the Henderson deal. 6 months later, Murphy's Diner had become the flagship location for what David Patterson now called community-centered hospitality. The physical space looked much the same. David had insisted on maintaining its vintage charm, but the impact on the lives connected to it had been transformative. Jake stood behind the counter, now wearing a shift manager name tag, balancing his final semester of high school with increased responsibilities at the diner. The scholarship fund David had established would cover his full tuition to Portland State University, where he planned to study business and hospitality management. Dad, table 6 needs their check. Jake called out to Carlos, who was taking a break from his construction supervision duties to help with the lunch rush. Carlos had successfully overseen the renovation of 3 Patterson restaurants and was now managing the company's expansion into sustainable, community-focused dining spaces. David emerged from the kitchen, where he'd been learning food preparation from Maria. He still maintained his role as CEO of Patterson Hospitality Group, but now he spent at least 1 day a week working directly in each of his restaurants. How are our numbers looking today? David asked Jake. Mrs. Thompson brought her sister from Seattle. They're both ordering the full meal instead of just splitting one. The Rodriguez family is celebrating Miguel getting promoted to crew chief on his landscaping crew. And Frank, Jake smiled, Frank brought a lady friend. Her name is Dorothy, and she likes apple pie too. David grinned. Sounds like a successful day to me. The bell above the door chimed, and a young woman in a business suit entered. Looking around nervously, Jake recognized the expression immediately, the same uncertainty he'd seen in David 6 months ago. Can I help you? Jake asked. I'm looking for David Patterson. I'm supposed to start training as a manager today, but I've never worked in a restaurant before. I'm coming from corporate consulting, and I'm not sure I'm cut out for this. David approached with a warm smile. You must be Sarah. I'm David. Don't worry about your background. We'll teach you everything you need to know. The most important qualification for working here is caring about people. But I don't understand, Sarah said. Why would a successful CEO want managers with no restaurant experience? Jake answered before David could. Because he learned that the best way to run a business is to understand it from the ground up. And because people who care about community can learn to serve food. But people who only care about profit can't learn to care about community. David nodded approvingly. Exactly, Sarah. I want you to train with Jake for your first week. He'll teach you what I learned when I worked here undercover, that every customer has a story. Every employee has dreams, and every interaction is an opportunity to make someone's day better. As the afternoon progressed, David found himself reflecting on how much his life had changed since that Christmas Eve. His relationship with his own adult children had improved dramatically when they saw him genuinely investing in young people. Like Jake, his business had become more profitable than ever as word spread about Patterson restaurants, commitment to community and employee welfare. But most importantly, David had rediscovered the joy in his work. Instead of dreading board meetings, he looked forward to hearing updates from his managers about employees who had earned scholarships, customers who had found community, and the small daily miracles that happened when businesses prioritized people over pure profit. Mr. Patterson, Jake said as they prepared for the dinner shift. I've been thinking about something. What's that? When you first came here pretending to be a waiter, you were trying to understand your business better. But I think you ended up understanding something even more important, which is Jake gestured around the busy diner where Mrs. Thompson was teaching Dorothy how to play cribbage. The Rodriguez children were doing homework in a corner booth, and Frank was showing pictures of his grandchildren to anyone who would listen. You discovered that the best businesses don't just serve customers, they create families. And the best leaders don't just manage employees, they invest in people's dreams. David felt tears prick his eyes as he looked around the diner that had taught him everything he thought he knew about success was incomplete. You know, Jake, when I walked in here on Christmas Eve, I thought I was conducting an undercover investigation of my own restaurant. What do you think you were really doing? I think I was finally coming home. That evening, as David helped close the diner alongside Jake, Marge, and Carlos, he realized that Christmas Eve at Murphy's Diner had given him the greatest gift of all, the understanding that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives you touch and the community you help create. The neon sign flickered cheerfully in the window as always, but now it represented something more than just a business. It was a beacon for anyone who needed to be reminded that they mattered, that kindness still existed, and that sometimes the most successful people are those who never forgot what it meant to serve others with genuine air.